Good afternoon, 上好. So today we are in the book of Proverbs. 今天我们学习箴言书, and we've been doing this book since last summer. 我们开始去年夏天就开始学习这本书, and we're in chapter 5 right now. The lesson we're going to look at is verses 7 through 14. 今天我们要学习7节到14节. And King Solomon, you'll notice that throughout this book, he will specifically address his son. Sometimes he will talk about just in general, but sometimes he will focus and say, "My son, please listen." 然后你会发现了，那个扫门王他偶尔在这本书会对他的儿子说："儿子要听我的话。"但是大部分他就是给很多的智慧的经文。However, this passage right here, 但是这个的教训的话, this teaching here, he's specifically talking to his son. 他特别的对他的儿子说了. And there's a few things that he wants to emphasize. 有几件事他让我们认真学习. Number one is that we have to protect our heart. 我们必须保护自己的心. And he says that actually what he says, Jesus later on reiterates. 他这里说的，耶稣以后又说，from your heart come out everything in your whole life. 从你的心里流出来你所有的生活的事. For example, the things that you desire, you will first desire them in your heart, and then later on you will act out upon those, good or bad. 你的心里的想要的东西的话，以后真的你可能以后做的. For example, in your heart, you might say, you know what? I really, really, really would like to get good at cooking. 在你心里可能对自己说，我真的想要以后可以做饭很厉害. So then you start to slowly start to research on how to cook better. 然后你开始慢慢学习怎么做饭更厉害. And then you go out and buy the ingredients. 以后你去买配料. And then you return home, you start to cook. 以后你回家开始做饭. But it started in your heart or your mind. 但是在你的心里开始的，你脑海里开始的. So King Solomon says, "My son, you need to listen. You have to protect your heart." 他Solomon说，我的儿子要听我的话，要保护你的心. And so what I want us to do is, as we're going through this, 我想我们这样做的，我们开始学习这个东西的话, I first want you to think that replace his son with you. 你成为他的儿子的代替. So whenever he says my son, 他说我的儿子的话, in this book, think to yourself, he's talking to me. 他说我的儿子的话，你就想起来他的意思，他要跟我说了. Now it doesn't matter if you say, well, I'm a girl, I'm a sister. 你说我是女儿，我是姊妹. It's the same thing, 是一样的. Because we all have the same issues. 我们都有一样的问题. Now, in this chapter and in chapter 7, 在这章还有在第7章, Solomon will address multiple times young men to be very, very cautious when it comes to women. 在第5章还有第7章，他说年轻的兄弟们、弟兄们要特别的小心，特别是关于女人. Because he talks about how it's very easy how a young man can get pulled away by a woman. 一个年轻的女人可以，男人可以很容易被一个坏的女人带走. And how men are very easily fall under what they say. They often will listen and follow, whether it's good or bad. 他们说了什么，可能真的听，然后跟随他，不管是好还是坏. All right, so let's look at, we're in Proverbs chapter 5. 箴言书第5章. Let's look at let's start with verse 7. 在第7节开始的. Oh, 1 second, 等一下. Verse 7. Hear me now, therefore, O ye children, and depart not from the words of my mouth. 中，次啊，现在要听从我，不可离弃我口中的言语. Now, if you remember earlier on in this same chapter, Solomon opens up and says, "My son, listen." And so he is giving the wisdom that God has imparted to him. He's sharing it with us. 然后在这章的话，开始的时候，他说我的儿子，他现在说了 孩子们就是我们，因为他是跟我们分享上帝赐给他的智慧。Now, I've said this many, many times before, and I'll say it again. 我说已经 好多次，我又说了一遍。If you ask any Christian，你随便问别的基督徒的话，Do you want to increase your wisdom？你想要提高你的智慧的水平吗？ Every single Christian is going to say yes. I want to increase my wisdom. 所有的基督徒我们都会说，我想提高我的智慧的水平。If you want to do that, and you say, well, I would love to be wise like King Solomon. 如果你说我想跟扫文王一样的智慧， I want to be wise. Then listen to what he has to say. 那你要听他的话。Because he's sharing the wisdom that God gave to him, he's sharing it with us. 因为他是跟我们分享上帝赐给他的智慧，他就跟我们分享了。And so what he's about to say, 他准备说的话 is very, very important, 非常非常重要的。And this, he always takes a stance of authority. 他老是有一个比他的位置比较高的。Yes, he's a king. 对了，他是一位王。But he's also a father. 但是他也是爸爸。And you know what's really, really sad? 你知道吗？很可怜吗？ Is that he was in scripture, he is the most wisest king. 在圣经里面，他是最智慧的人。He's the most wise person except for Jesus. 除了耶稣的话。He had the most wisdom. 他有最多的智慧。But you know what's very sad? 你知道吗？是非常可怜吗？ Is that he spent all his time teaching his son. 他花了这么多时间教他的儿子。And in the end, his son rejected the counsel of his dad and died very young. 最后的他的儿子拒绝了他的爸爸的智慧，以后就很年轻去世了。Because when his father died, 扫文王去世了的话， he became king. 他成为王。And he had a choice. There's a point when all the people come up to him and says, you know what, the taxes are very, very high. 犹太人都来到他的对面，他的儿子就成为王的时候，他说现在的缴税特别的高。And our work is very, very, we're working very hard. 他说我们而且很努力工作。And so he goes, we want you to change the situation. 我们想要你完全改变这个情况。And so the son, he goes, okay, get the wise men that also helped my father, get them. 他说你去找我的爸爸的给他推进的人，就是智慧的人，你叫他们来。And it says, and I also want you to, I want my friends that I grew up with, I want them to come as well. 我想我的长大的朋友们也一起过来的。And so he asked Solomon's counselors, the men that Solomon would often, his father, would often seek wisdom with. He'd share a problem and they'd say, you know what, we think you should do this. And then he'd make a decision. 他就去叫了他的爸爸有一些的很智慧的人 counselors， 然后他会跟他们分享他的问题，说了，嘿，你可以给我你的建议，你怎么看呢？ And then he also says, and then he shared this issue with his friends. 然后他跟他的朋友们分享这个问题。And the men that gave King Solomon their suggestion, he says, you know what you need to do? You need to lower the taxes. You need to ease the burden on the people. And if you do so, they will love you. 他说，如果你把那个缴税比较低的话，不要让他们太努力的上班的话，以后你的百姓会很爱你。But you know what his friends said? 你知道吗？他的朋友们说什么？ They said, you know what? Forget them. You're the king. 他说，你知道吗？别在乎他们，你是王。Increase their work and increase the taxes. 让他们都加班，而且让他加多一点的缴税。And so he thought about it and says, you know what? I'm going to listen to my friends. 他说他思考一会儿，说我要听我朋友们的话。And because his friends are all young, 他的朋友们都是年轻的。Because he's a young king, 他也是年轻的王。And when the people came to the king again, 这么多人来叫他的话， it says, what is your answer after 3 days? 3天后他们就来了，说你的答案是什么？ he goes, if you thought my dad was hard, I'm going to be even worse to you. 他说，如果你爸爸觉得我爸爸对你很难的话，我会让你更努力、更辛苦的工作。You know what the people did? 你知道吗？他们都什么？ They killed the king. 他们杀了这个王。 And Solomon spent a lot of time. He wrote out his wisdom. He taught him. 他写出来他的智慧。他花了很多时间教他的儿子。But ultimately, his son had a choice. 但是最后的他的儿子要自己选择。His dad has already gone. 他爸爸已经走了。And our life is like that. 我们的生活也是一样的。God has His word. 上帝有他的话语。And this book specifically is a book on wisdom. 然后这本书都是智慧的。And so what Solomon is saying is like, listen. He goes, hear what I'm about to say. 他说你要听我的话。He says, 种子啊，孩子们啊，现在要听从我。为什么要听我的话？因为对你生活非常重要的。为什么？因为会影响你。Let's look at verse 8, 第8节。Now remember, earlier on in this chapter, 你要记住，在这5章的上面的内容 he's talking about young men and women that like to sleep around. 他说他上面的内容就是年轻的男人，还有一个比较希望的 like 约炮的女人。Verse 8, 第8节 says, remove thy way. So he's continuing what he's saying. 他继续给我们上课 he says, remove thy way far from her and come not nigh to the door of her house. 你要使你的道路远离她，不可靠近她家的门。So what is he saying here? So 他的意思是什么？ You have to read the above, what the verses are above. 你要看上面的内容。But if you look at it, you open your phones up or Bible and you look at what's going on above, he's talking about women that like to sleep around. And he talks about how men get pulled into their trap. 他说就是比较希望的 like 约炮，或者希望 like 开放的女生。然后他说很多小年轻的男人，他们不思考，他们就很快他上泡泡就泡泡。And he goes, but however, Solomon says, don't fall into it. It's a trap. 但是 Solomon 说你别这么做的，特别的危险。And he says, so what you need to do is instead, if she tries to pull you in, you have to leave, pull yourself far away from her. 如果她向你过来的话，你要远离开她。Don't play with it. 不要跟她玩。Because it's very, very dangerous. 因为很危险的。Look at in chapter 7, he's talking about this. 在第7章，他也说这个问题。He says he describes her as a strange woman. So this in chapter 7 is very interesting. 第7章非常有意思 because it says it's a story. 有一个故事 and it's a woman. She's married. 有一个女人，她已经结婚了 and her husband goes to another city for work. 她的丈夫不是长老，他去别的城市工作。Well, it's more like a 出差。He goes on a business trip, so he's going to be gone for whatever 2 weeks. 他走了2周大概。And it says while he's gone, 他走的时候 the wife makes the house really nice, and she puts on her best clothes and puts on all this makeup and everything. 她准备好她的房子，穿了最漂亮的衣服，或者最 sexy 的衣服，化妆很厉害。And it says, and she looks at her house, she looks out the window. 她看到在开窗的时候 and she sees a young man walking by. 她看到年轻的男人在走路。And she waves at him. 她说要过来。And she opens up and says, come on in. My husband's gone for a few weeks. You can stay with me. 她说我的老公他现在出差，他不会那么快回来，你可以跟我住在一起这2周大概。And it says that this young man, 这个年轻的男人 he's stupid. 他很傻 He doesn't think about the consequence. 他没有思考以后有什么问题 He's like, okay, and sleeps with her. 然后他说 okay, 然后跟他上床。But the Bible goes on to say, 但是圣经继续说了 he goes, you don't know, but actually she's pulling your soul to hell. 他说你不知道，但是他要把你的 like 灵魂带到地狱。And so he's continuing on. Why? Because what's interesting is that the issues that they had thousands of years ago, we still have today. 非常有意思，因为他们几千年前的问题 到现在还在。Like think about this. 你想一想 why is right now, why are there some places in China that have, there's a lot more AIDS in those areas? 那为什么在中国有一些地方癌症长比较多吗？ Because of this issue, because of these issues, 因为这样的问题。And so Solomon says, this is wisdom. Solomon 王说就是智慧 leave these type of situations. 离开这个情况。Now you could say, well, it's not just the women, it's the men. It is. 你可以说这不是只有女人，也是男人的。So you can take this and just flip it over. 你可以把这个东西反过来。But you have to understand that right now Solomon is a father talking to his son. So he's using a woman as an example. But you could flip it and say it could be a mother talking to her daughter. 你要记住，就是扫门王他是爸爸跟他的儿子说话，所以这个就是为了他的情况，但是也可以把这个问题反过来，妈妈跟他的女儿说了。And so this is now I know that it's one thing for us as Christians to talk about this. 我知道，就是我们基督徒就学习这个问题，思考这个问题。But it's a little bit different for unbelievers. 跟非基督徒有点不一样的 because they're not Christians, 因为他们不是基督徒。However, I know all of us here have unbelieving friends. 我知道我们在这里都有非基督徒的朋友们。And so what we need to do is if we see a situation like that, we can remind them. Why? Because if we really care for them, we want to remind them. 那如果我们看到我们的朋友们也遇到这个问题的话，也要提醒他们，要爱他们，对吧？ But ultimately, every person makes their own choices. 但是最后的选择就是每个人都要自己选择。Look at verse 9, 第九节. And now he talks about part of, this is just part of it, part of what happens if you go into that. 然后呢，就是一部分，如果你做这坏事的话的结果是什么？ Oh, Justin just said he can't come. Justin 刚才说他来不及，没关系。Verse 9, 第九节 Lest thou give thine honor unto others, and thy years unto the cruel, 免得你将你的尊荣给别人，将你的岁月给残忍的人。Last night, 昨天晚上 I was watching something on. I was watching it was an X clip. It was like a couple minutes long, and it was on investments on money. 昨天晚上我看到一个 X 的短视频，就是为了 like 投资钱。And this guy, he's very very famous in America. He's a Christian. Him and his wife are Christians. And people will what they'll do is people will call into his show and they'll talk about their financial situations. 他在美国他是非常有名的人，而他和他的太太都是基督徒。然后呢，他的工作是什么？他让很多人就给他打电话，他们分享他们情况，然后他就给他们回复了。But it's all dealing with money. 但是都是关于钱。So a person will call up and say something like, we have this much debt, and I have this much credit card bills, blah blah blah, and they'll say, what advice do you give me? 他说我借了这么多钱，要给银行我的信用卡什么什么什么的，你有什么什么建议？我怎么脱离这个问题？ And he said, Tashwala, he goes, a lot of people have a choice. 很多人有选择 when they're in their 20s, 他们在20岁的时候 a lot of them will have an opportunity to get married. 很多人有机会可以结婚了 But right now, in 2025, 但是现在在2025年 a lot of people will choose to live together as opposed to getting married. 很多人选择就是住在一起，不选择结婚了 And he goes, you know what? He goes, you know what I found out? Because he every single day, many people will call, and he's been doing this for maybe like 40 years. I don't know, a long time. Maybe not 40 years. Yeah, maybe 40 years or so. 他已经做这个工作40多年，然后每天有这么多人给他打电话。So it's Christians and unbelievers because he's very very good with managing money. 因为他管理钱的超级厉害，所以很多人不管是基督徒不是基督徒都会靠他的智慧。And he goes, you know what I found out? He goes, 你知道吗？我发现了很大的问题是什么？ He goes, if people just they hook up or they live together as opposed to getting married when they're usually in their late 30s or 40s, their money issues are they have a lot of money issues, as opposed to someone who would get married early on and they him and the wife or the wife and the husband, they work through their issues. Usually when they're in their 40s or 50s, they have really stable money management. 然后他说了，很多年轻人可能是20多岁的话，可能就是不选择结婚了，但是他们可能跟这个人在一起，那个人在一起，跟这个人就在一起一段时间，那个人就在一起1年2年后，他说他们到30、40岁的时候，他们的管理的钱的问题很多，但是他说如果他们很年轻选择结婚的话，他们在20岁的时候，可能他还有他的太太或者太太跟他的先生要很努力40岁后，他们的管理的钱很稳定的，没有什么 debt。但是他发现了很多人还没有结婚的话，他们的 debt 很多，他们的花钱的问题很多，明白吗？So he's saying and this is a guy, he's talking about what he's experienced. This isn't his personal opinion. This is what the statistics. 这不是他自己的想法，他自己了解。他说就是因为他已经做这个工作这么多年了。And so he's saying right now, like look at what Solomon saying. 你看到 Solomon 王说什么？ he says, lest you give your honor unto others and thy years unto the cruel. So he's saying you're using your best years and you're giving it away. You're not building something up for the future. 他说什么？他说了免得你将你的尊荣给别人的，将你的岁月给他人的人，就是你把你最厉害的时间，就是很乱，就随便给别人。And so think about that. 你想一想 what is he talking about here? 他的意思是什么？ Well, if you're with this person for a couple years, you're with that person for a couple years, and you break up, you get back together, you break up, or you get back with someone else, you're not really progressing in life. 就比如你跟这个人在一起一段时间，那个人在一起几年，然后就分手就找别人什么什么什么的话，10年后、20年后、40年后，你生活没有什么大的进步。And so here it's saying that Solomon is saying, like, look, because this chapter, 因为这讲的话, it's addressed to young people, 就是为了年轻的人. And he's saying, like, Solomon, remember, Solomon, he had, how many wives did Solomon have? 谁知道 Solomon 王有多少老婆? It was a lot, right? 超级多. And then he had concubines as well. 然后他有很多 concubines. Yeah, whatever. I couldn't hear what she said. But anyway, so he had a lot. 所以他有很多. And so he's talking about also from personal experience. 他的意思也是他自己的见证. And so Solomon says because now he's older, he's an older man. 他现在年龄比较大. And you know what I find to be sad, 我自己觉得现在是很可怜, is that many people, especially when we're in college or right after college, most people don't tend to think, where am I going to be 10 years from now? Where am I going to be 5 years from now? Where am I going to be 20 years from now? They just live for today. 很多人大学的学生，大学后，他们只有思考现在今天，他们没有思考我5年后怎么了，我10年后怎么了，我20年后怎么了。And the thing is that all of us, we all have time. We all have the same amount of time. 我们的时间都一样的. Every day you have 24 hours. Same with me. 每天有24个小时，跟我一样的. There's 7 days a week. 每周7年. And what Solomon says is like, he goes, don't give away your honor by sleeping around. 他说你不要把你的荣耀跌掉，随便给别人。Because right now, this is the time that you should be building something up. 因为现在要很努力，尽力发展你的生活。But a lot of young people, what they do every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they go to the bars, they go to the club. 但是很多人每星期五、星期六、星期天，他们去那个酒吧，或者 what is the club? It's 我忘记了。 ，yeah，他们都出了很多，就是为了 one。I remember when I was in high school because I started working when I was 15，我15岁就开始上班。And one of the jobs that I had, I worked for, it was during Christmas, it was for like a month. 我就是为了一个月，就是上班这的时候。I worked at a electronics store in America. It's called Best Buy. 就是如果你是美国人，你就知道，就是一个like 有电脑的，有 yeah, not a little bit different. It's kind of like what's going to it in China? It'd be like if Jidong had a store. 如果机动有电的话，就是差不多了。但是都是 like 电脑、手机什么的。Anyways, I remember, and the guy that one of because there's many employees there, 有很多人在哪里上班。And I remember one of the guys, he wasn't a boss, but he was over me. 他不是老板，但是他的位置比我高。And every single weekend, he would go to the bars. 他每周末去酒吧。And you know what? I knew this guy because I worked there for one Christmas and then I worked there another Christmas. 我在一个圣诞节在哪里上班，第二个圣诞节在哪里上班。And every single weekend he would spend, he's like, I spent $150 last night. 他说我昨天晚上花了$150，就是为了喝酒。And then the next time he do the same thing. And it was always on the weekends. 然后都是周末的。And you know what? He never had any extra money. 他老是没有什么别的钱。Because he was like, oh, I saw this really beautiful girl. I treated her to a drink and blah blah blah. And he'd always spend all the money. 他说哦，看到这么漂亮的女人就请她喝酒什么什么的，然后他什么都没钱。And a year later, when I went back there for another month to work, he was in the same situation. Nothing changed. 以后我去再上班的话，他情况一样的。And I was thinking like every single weekend, like I might during that time because I would only work because I was in high school. I only did like 100. I don't remember how much I made, but like $150 would be like my entire paycheck for that week. 就比如150块，就是我的那周的我赚钱的我的收入。And he would spend that on one night on drinking, and he didn't make much money. 然后他一天晚上就喝酒，为了女人的话就花了这么钱。And so I read this, so 我读这个的话 and I think about like giving your young years away to what? To foolishness. You give away your honor, your money or whatever. 你年龄的时候就随便给别人，你的荣耀随便给别人。And I was reminded of the video I saw last night. 我提醒就是昨天晚上看那个视频 because he says a lot of young people, when they live these type of lifestyles, they hook up with this person, with that person, and then, when they get 10 years later, 20 years later, they have no money because they wasted it all. Instead of building something up, a future, they just, oh, I want to be with this person for a while, be with that person for a while, and then they get older and then nothing. 因为很多年轻的人的话，他们说哦，我跟这个人在一起多长时间，那个人在一起多长时间，花了钱这里，花了钱哪里，以后10年后、20年后，他们还有管理钱的问题。And so everything that Solomon says here, remember, everything that he's sharing here is from God, even though it might be Solomon personally speaking. 你要想一想，他现在跟我们分享的话，都是从上帝来的。但是我知道是Solomon王分享的。但是要记住，是谁给他智慧？是上帝给他智慧。Remember when Solomon was little, it says that he had a dream. Solomon 王是年轻的时候，他做了梦。And in the dream, God asked him, he goes, ask me anything and I'll give it to you. 上帝就问他，你祈求我，你想要什么，我就给你什么。And what did he say? 他说什么？ He's wisdom, yes, 智慧。He goes, give me wisdom. And why? He explains, he goes, I need wisdom because I'm such a young king and I have to rule over all these people. I need your wisdom. 他说我年轻这么少，而且我必须做你的百姓的王，我需要智慧。And now he's older, 他现在年龄大了。And he's writing out the wisdom that God gave him. 他在写出来上帝赐给他的智慧。And part of what he's saying, he goes, especially when you're young, 他一部分的智慧他在写什么？ he goes, be careful, 要特别小心。Especially young men with young women, 特别是年轻的男人跟年轻的女人。 And if they want to hook up, don't do it. 如果他们是约炮的话，你别这么做的。And this is look at the context. 你看上面的内容，你都知道就是他的意思。Because he specifically talks about it. 因为他非常精确说到这个问题。Look at verse 5 or sorry verse 10. 第10节。King Solomon says, Solomon 王说了 Let strangers be filled with thy wealth, and thy laborers be in the house of a stranger. 恐怕外人保持你劳碌的来的，你的劳碌贵了外人的家。Now think about this. 你想想 You work all week. 你一周很努力上班 and you make whatever. 你赚了多少钱 Most people, they don't have a lot of extra money. 大部分的人没有特别多钱。And if you say, well, I'm gonna go to a bar this weekend. 我这周末要去酒吧 And there's there's so many beautiful women there. 哪里有那么多的美女 Or if you're a girl, I'm gonna go to this place. There's so many handsome guys. 哪里有这么多的帅哥 Oh, let me treat you to some dinner. Let me treat you to that. 我请你吃饭，请你喝酒什么的。And maybe have one night together. 可能一天晚上约炮。And then the next week you go to and you meet someone else. 下周你就遇到别人的。I know probably us, we've never experienced that. 我们可能没有遇到这个问题. There's a lot of people that do. 就是很多人也是这样子。And how do we know this? 我们怎么知道? Well, for example, if this didn't exist, AIDS wouldn't be such a big issue in China right now. 如果没有这个问题的话，艾滋病在中国不会那么厉害。Or many other diseases, 或者很多别的问题。And a lot of it is spread because this person sleeps with that person sleeps with that person, and it spreads very, very fast. 因为这个人跟这个人上床，那个人跟这个人上床，很快就是转给别人的。Last week we were outside selling cats. 上周我们在外面就是卖猫咪的话 one of my friends, she messaged me. She's like, I met this foreign guy online on 小红书。他发给我信息，他说了在小红书他认识一个外国人。And this foreigner, he was a teacher and a model in China. 他在中国是一个模特还有老师。And he told her, 他跟他说 he goes, you have no idea, because this girl, she's a university student, but she's very 社恐. She's very 社恐 is like social anxiety type. Anyways, 她很社恐，所以她很少出门。社恐，对，所以她很少出门。And she usually apart from when she's not in the university, she sleeps during the day and she plays video games during the night. 她白天睡觉，晚上就是玩游戏。因为她是我的朋友，我都知道她怎么样的。But she very does not often go out. I think she's this 20, 21-ish. 她21岁大概。And she's like, I met this foreigner on 小红书。她说我在小红书就认识这个外国人。And she sent me many, many screenshots of the conversation. 她截图很多他们的讨论。And this foreign guy's like, he's like, you have no idea how easy it is to sleep with Chinese girls here. 他说你都不知道在这里可以跟很多中国的女人上床。He's like, I've already slept with over 200. 他说已经超过200的在中国。He's like, he in his words, this guy's I think he was from France. 他是法国人好像。And he's like, he goes, it's so easy. 他说非常重要的。This is what Solomon's talking about. 就是扫门王的意思。He goes, don't do that. 你别这么做的。Apart from like the health risk, 除了身体的健康的问题 there's also it talks about your honor, your wealth, everything. This is all tied together. 你自己的荣耀或者面子，你可以了解你自己的以后的钱什么的。Because think about that. Whenever you have like this guy, I don't know who he is. 这个人我不认识的。And I don't know his situation. 不了解他的情况。But if he's slept with over 200 people, most likely he's treating this person to go out to eat. He's buying drinks, etc., etc. I probably, I'm like 95% sure this guy doesn't have much money because he spends it all for this and that. But sooner or later, he's going to be in his 30s. Sooner or later, he's going to be in his 40s. So 这个人我不了解，我不认识他。 但是我知道他可能我自己猜95%，他收到什么收入的话，很快花完了，因为他已经跟这么多不同的人在一起的，这里花钱，哪里花钱。Remember last year，我还记得去年，our friend Seth，我们的朋友，英国的朋友 Seth。I remember during Christmas，在圣诞节的时候，because he has two girlfriends，他有2个女朋友，and he's like you have no idea how expensive it is。他说你都不知道我花钱这么厉害。He goes, I have to for Christmas。他说我为了圣诞节的时候，I have to buy her gifts and her gifts。我说我圣诞节有买他送给他礼物，买他送给礼物。And he goes, and I have to take him out to eat, but at different times。我要带他去吃饭，我要带他去吃饭。And he's like, I have no money。他说我没有什么钱。And then he went back to England，然后他回去英国。And he broke up with them。他跟他们分手。And I know now he's back, and I know he's with one of the other girls。我知道他已经回来，他有在跟一个人在一起的。But think about that，你想一想，the year that he was here，这去年他在这里，all that money he spent on these girls, and he's not even with, or at least one of them. You know, I don't really understand the situation now, but think about that. He says, I have no money. He goes, I have to buy her gifts, I have to buy her gifts, and if I don't buy her the same thing, she's going to get jealous and blah, blah, blah. 他说，如果我没有，我必须买礼物送给他，必须买礼物送给他。如果我没有买送给他礼物，他以后会嫉妒什么什么什么的。And so, like, all of his money is just going for what? 他花这么多钱是为了什么？So that in 6 months he can break up and go back to England? 6个月后可以分手回去英国？ You know that this is what Solomon wants us to avoid. Solomon 让我们脱离这个问题。And I know some of us are smiling because we know Seth. 我知道，因为我们都认识 Seth. You know, I remember what was it last week he came here. 上周他就过来了 and he met Chojin， 然后 Chojin 就认识他 because we're leaving and Chojin came. 你还记得那个 Seth 那个英国朋友 and then we went downstairs to start selling the cats and she was asking us some questions about it and I told her. And she's like, how does he have two girlfriends? Does he have any money? Blah, blah, blah. 她说怎么可能有2个女朋友？他还有钱吗？ I said, no, he doesn't. As a matter of fact, right now he's living in his girlfriend's house because he doesn't have money. 他现在跟他女朋友住在一起，因为他的没什么钱。But think about that. 你想一想 This is like the trap that men can easily get in. 就是很危险的地方，特别是年轻的男人，可以就是这个坑可以对他说了，你也听清楚他说什么。But it's especially for guys because a young guy just thinks, wow, a girl wants to sleep with me. Okay. 因为年轻男人就觉得哇塞，他也要跟我上床，那 OK 了，我就跟他上床。And a lot of us, especially when you're like 20 years old, 25 years old, you're not thinking clearly. 20岁、25岁，你就可能没有思考未来的事。You know, so this is like, and Solomon is saying, listen, my children, my son, listen. 我的儿子，我的孩子们就听我的话。And look at what he says in verse 10. 再看第10节 says, let strangers be filled with thy wealth. Someone else will take your money. 恐怕外人保持老路你来的，就是你把你的钱给别人的。And so when the financial advisor that I was listening to last night， 昨天晚上我听那个管理钱的人 financial advisor，he says when you get married young in your 20s, you avoid a lot of these issues, and then you can build something together with your wife. Yeah, it might be very hard at first, but later on, it's going to be a lot easier than the person that just jumps around. 然后他的建议是，他发现了你年轻的时候结婚了，可能第1年、第2年、第3年很努力，你和你的太太和你和你的老公要努力赚钱，但是10年后、20年后会顺利很多，因为你们一起慢慢脱离这些的问题，还有一起发展你们的家庭。And so Solomon is saying, be careful because you don't want to give away yourself to other people that 5 years from now are not going to be in your life. 要小心，因为你不要把你自己的钱、你自己的荣耀、你自己名字归给外面的人，然后5年后你们 以后不会再遇到了，你5年后没有什么关系的。And that's true，这是真理的。And so think about this. I think we should stop here. 我们可以在这里就停着了。但是想一想，Now it might not be, this might not be for you right now. 这个可能不是为了你现在的。But think about this. 但是你想一想，Maybe you know someone that's similar in this situation, kind of like this. 或者你可能认识你的朋友，可能的情况差不多了。Maybe you can help them. 你可能帮助他们。Maybe they're not Christians, but you can say, hey, have you thought about, what you're doing recently? 你有没有思考你最近的情况怎么样的？Right now in China, a lot of people, not just in China, all over the world, a lot of people, they don't have a lot of money. 很多人不管是在中国还是别的地方，没有特别多钱。And the last thing you want to do is just give away your money to something that has no future. 而且你不要随便花你钱，为了一个这个情况或者这个人，我和他肯定没有未来的。Last thing，最后的 talk about Seth again，because he's a really good friend，就是再说 Seth，因为他是非常好的朋友。I've asked him, I've talked with him multiple times about this. 我跟他几次讨论这个问题。He only wants to marry a white girl from Britain. 他就想跟一个白人的英国的白人结婚了 because he's white and he's British. 因为他是英国的白人。All right, so that's he says this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have kids with her. 他说我要这么做的，跟他结婚了，生孩子们。All right. So that means if that's what he's going to do, 如果他真的要这么做的话, that means every single person he hooks up with here has automatically no future. Understand? 就是他现在跟谁在一起的话，以后真的没有什么未来了，就是为了现在而已。And a lot of people are like that. 很多人就是这样子。Oh, I know we're not going to get married, but we're just here for fun for a year or whatever. 我知道我们以后不会结婚的，但是就是为了好好玩而已。And a lot of people are like that. 很多人就是这样子。And Solomon's saying, don't do that. 不要这么做的。Because one day you're going to be 30. One day you're going to be 50. 因为有一天你是30岁，有一天你是50岁。And your money, your wealth, and maybe even your health are gone. 你的钱，你的面子，还有可能你的身体的健康都走了。Let's pray. 祷告。Heavenly Father, I just pray that you give us wisdom with our everyday lives. 天父，我祈求你来赐给我们智慧，特别是我们每天的生活的智慧。And Lord, help us because our church has a lot of new Christians 帮助我们，因为我们教会的新的弟兄姊妹们比较多。And a lot of us have not even yet graduated from the university. 很多人还没有大学毕业了。And so the temptations are all around us. 我们的周围全部有诱惑。Maybe it's with spending money, 可能是花钱的诱惑。Maybe it's sexual temptations, 可能是行为的诱惑。Or maybe it's something else, 可能是别的问题。Lord, I pray that you help us to escape our temptations, 帮我们脱离我们自己的罪恶或者诱惑。And to follow in your footsteps and hear your word, 然后跟随你的行为，还有你的话语。Just Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we love you. 圣父、圣子、圣灵，我们爱你。我奉耶稣基督的名，阿门。